Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're finally going to be talking about the new double album from Drake, Scorpion. Hey folks, are you sick of Drake yet? Or are you just well past the point and are just sick of people complaining about being sick of Drake? Or have you reached the point where you've just accepted Drake in the same way you do the movement of the tides and the stars? That once a year he'll vomit out over an hour of mediocre hip-hop and R&B, and it'll bulldoze over the charts, and by the next year you'll forget any of it ever happened outside of maybe the singles muscled onto the radio. If that. And if you're in that third camp, congratulations. Happy to have you here. I get the feeling that I was kind of early to reaching this place thanks to Billboard Breakdown, where my annoyance at Drake overexposure began in 2015, worsened in 2016, and finally faded in just to exasperated shrugs by 2017. I have weathered multiple album bombs from this guy. I've seen the shifts from pitch black future collaborations to utterly misconceived flirtations with grime, to a lingering obsession with mid-tempo tropical tones that serve as perfectly serviceable background music, if that. And for those of you who expect your R&B and hip-hop to have passion or intensity or wordplay that doesn't sink into a quagmire of concerned trolling or unwarranted paranoia, you must be new here. But I will admit, I did have a smattering of curiosity about Scorpion, at least at first. Nice for what? It was a really damn good single. And when Pusha T delivered a wounding blow with the story of Adidon, it became very well known that Scorpion, it had to be good to save Drake's career. And those hopes were promptly dashed when it was revealed that Scorpion was nearly an hour and a half. I'm Upset was a mediocre slog of a song that I still don't like. And Drake was gonna make an R&B track over an unused Michael Jackson song that came from the same Paul Anka session that spat out Love Never Felt So Good a few years ago with Justin Timberlake. And you know what? Justin Timberlake didn't get a pass, and you can be sure as shit that Drake's not gonna get one either for this brand of grave robbery. So yeah, my patience was burned away years ago, and dozens of forgettable songs. So, will this Scorpion survive, or is it gonna get crushed beneath my merciless boot? Well, folks, honestly, does it even really matter at this point? And yeah, this is another case where I don't feel like I'm bucking against the critical consensus, or even saying much that we don't already know at this point. Scorpion, it's bad. It's mediocre at best, but for the most part, it's bad. It's tough to tell whether it's Drake's worst project, but it's by far his most inept in terms of overall song construction, production, delivery, writing, and structure. The sort of album where you can tell the machine that's been running on empty for years now in terms of inspiration, it's now finally starting to break down and come apart at the seams. Not only that, if Drake was intending to frame Scorpion as a recovery from the blows that Pusha T inflicted, yeah, that didn't happen. No matter how much slapdash pandering that Drake tried to cram into this. In other words, if you can't tell, it's not good. But really, we have to start with the structure first. And since Drake won't stop trying to take pot shots on the sideline at his camp, let's compare this to Pusha T and Daytona on a structural level, and I'm sorry, there really is no comparison. Drake records have always had a bad case of the bloat, but typically that can be deflected by catchy features, or smart sequencing, or a sense of unearned bombast or flair. And yet, instead of chopping things down for a more focused parry away, or even just a project that could be easily digested by the mainstream audience that couldn't give two shits about rap beef, Drake instead threw 25 of his most malformed, undercooked, and underproduced joints at the wall in the prayer that the volume would smother out any sort of criticism. And yet, it starts falling apart at the seams almost immediately. Mostly because for as much Drake claims that one disc is hip-hop and the other disc is R&B, one disc is addressing the beef, the other one's trying to win back the fan base, it's more clear that one side is for his male fan base, the other's for the women. And there might be a little bit more singing on the second half, but still plenty of rapping, which doesn't allow you to easily segment this project in the same way you could for, say, Forever Is a Mighty Long Time by Big Crit. Hell, Blue Tint was a beat that was originally intended for that album, and thank God it didn't show up there. And what's more distracting is that not only is there not an appreciable distance in the sound or the texture between the discs, the subtlety of Drake's approach is near completely gone. Half-formed minimalist beats with the occasional oily, jagged synth melody if we're lucky, and then an expensive R&B or soul sample when he's trying to seem sensitive. Samples that, for the record, nearly always draw attention to artists that I'd much rather be listening to than Drake. Yes, you got samples of Mariah Carey and D'Angelo and Lauryn Hill and Boyz II Men. Samples that when you're counting on the audience recognizing them as a subtle form of bragging that you could afford those samples, but for me they always nearly remind me of better music that I'd much rather be listening to than this 90-minute bloated monstrosity. And we might as well get the Michael Jackson sample issue out of the way right now, because honestly, the groove behind Don't Matter to Me is genuinely good, with the slick hand claps and the thrumming trap in the low end. Yeah, the lyrics are kind of gross and they're concern trolling, and we will get back to that, but I will say the same damn thing that I said about these Paul Anka Michael Jackson sessions when they were sampled by Justin Timberlake. If Michael Jackson wanted below average songs released, he would have done so decades ago. And for artists to use these samples for cheap brand association, it's genuinely gross and really disrespectful to the legacy. You know, Drake, you're not getting a pass. And you know, we might as well talk about the other guests that are on this album, what few of them there are. That's another thing. For as long as Views and More Life were, Drake's presence was kind of divvied up by other MCs and singers, which you kind of need for balance when you're not an especially dynamic singer or rapper. And you know what? For the record, Drake can be dynamic as a performer when he wants to, but his choice on Scorpion is to double down on his most tedious and basic flows and leaves you desperate to hear anybody else. Almost enough to convince you that that Jay-Z verse on Talk Up is actually good. Now don't get me wrong, it's okay for this brand of bragging, but when you get lines like "Y'all killed X and let Zimmerman live," it's the sort of endorsement and cosign I did not expect nor really want to hear coming from Jay, just saying. And from there, look, you get uncredited snippets from Nicki Minaj on That's How You Feel and from Future on Blue Tint. And again, I'm not a fan of either of them, but for a break from Drake, I'd be fine just to hear more of a verse or something. And it makes sense too. You'd think Drake would want to use this time to gather up his friends and crew instead of just usurp their contributions, even more so with Party Next Door and Ty Dolla $ign on this album. You know, the exact same nonsense for which you tried to call out Pusha T on Duppy Freestyle. Now, we'll come back to the volumes of Drake hypocrisy in a couple of minutes, but it does tie into a larger issue of the framing of this album. The reason that he's not bringing his friends and family and crew closer is to project more than ever a sense of isolation. To garner sympathy from the audience, Drake is all alone. He's gonna be the good guy once again. And man alive, the second you start digging into the content, it just does not work. And the first problem is how it feels markedly less personal or subtle than previous albums. Go back to records like Take Care or Nothing Was the Same, or how so much of the appeal was built on hearing the real Drake. Enough so that Meek Mill was convinced that exposing Drake's ghostwriters would be enough to firmly take him down in the mainstream and undermining that personal narrative. But really, I would argue Drake does even more damage himself on that front on this album. And a huge part of that is a lack of real vulnerability and deeper storytelling. Let's put aside Pusha T altogether for a second. There's nothing close to the genuine questions of angst or mistakes that were at the core of what made songs like Marvin's Room so damn compelling, what made them emotionally work. Instead replaced by utterly bored bragging songs like Non-Stop that sound like unfinished demos without any real melody, or the sour-faced bitchiness of I'm Upset that I've already torn to pieces on Billboard Breakdown, or the repeated assertions off of songs like God's Plan that this was predestined for Drake from a higher power itself, which takes away all the stakes. So congratulations for undercutting any sense of paranoia or tension or drama, Drake. But this is where that Pusha T shadow, it looms heavy over this album, because there's also a fair number of songs where Drake tries to gaslight the audience into thinking that he didn't lose this beef, not really, and that everything is just truly fine. He's still on top, which not only undercuts his veneer of being the honest good guy, hell, he even says it directly on 8 out of 10 that he is that good guy, but also does serious damage to the record as a whole that he's trying to gaslight us like this. Go back to 8 out of 10, where he's goading that he could have taken it harder and ended things, but given that he never did, why in the nine hell should we even believe him? Framing this like you're above the whole situation makes you look like a pompous jackass who got exposed and can't respond. And framing your shots as just playful jabs on Can't Take a Joke is even more galling. If you're squaring up to fight, you can't call it off just because you got exposed and you're losing. Now granted, there's a running question of how much Drake's beef is really with Pusha T or how it's more directed at Kanye West, and there are a lot of references across Emotionless and 8 out of 10 and Mob Ties to kind of support that, but you can't just sidestep the main guy firing the shots when it's clear that you might want to go at somebody else on his crew, or at the very least dispatch Pusha T first before you try to destroy Kanye. And it makes songs like Is There More feel completely wasted. Of course there's more beyond the fame and your corporate connections and your asinine girl problems. We're getting to those, I promise. Because if you truly didn't care, if you wanted to settle this once and for all, really rise to that throne, you would have ignored J. Prince. Yes, I know that Mob Ties is partially a reference to that, but it doesn't change the overall situation in the public. Then you would have placed yourself above anybody who wanted to control you, and you would have just ended Kanye and Pusha T's career. Screw the money. If you're that powerful, if you can rise above it, you would have done it. But you didn't. And we know you didn't because you couldn't. And all of a sudden, that scorpion doesn't seem to have nearly so much venom now, does it? But okay. Let's talk about the songs about the women, shall we? Because if there is a reason this slog of a second disc even exists, it's to repair some of the damage to that female fanbase. And if there's a place where Drake could have salvaged something by owning up to that L and delivering a confessional narrative, regaining the integrity brand that he tries to hide behind and I have never ever bought, it's here. And no, I'm not talking about that stupid line from Emotionless. I wasn't hiding my kid from the world, I was hiding the world from my kid. Already heralded by every other deadbeat dad around the world the second they heard it. I'm talking about a cut like March 14th, where at the very end, Drake tries to build some sort of narrative with his son, and you'd like to think that Drake would have at least tried to direct any songs at Sophie, or at least make a stab at something that feels genuinely heartfelt, but no. Doesn't happen. Instead, we get Drake calling out girls for fronting on social media on Emotionless, as if he doesn't do the same, or doesn't say the girl is fine to do so on That's How You Feel, or how then he calls out English girls who don't have good manners on Peak. That is coming from you, Drake, that they want to dictate that. Or how he's ever so careful to make it clear that she was the one who said I love you first on Summer Games, to avoid any deeper culpability when he doesn't want to get involved. Or how he once again shouts out old exes on In My Feelings, get over it. Or the majority of the passive-aggressive bullshit that he pulls in the second verse of Jaded, reportedly about how Georgia Smith, how he could have shaped her potential and how she's just a baby for him now, and yet going out to meet her family to try to deepen the relationship was such a waste of time because he ultimately got rejected. And all that kind of undercuts that sensitive gentleman side that Drake wants to constantly project, especially with him making songs like Nice for What and Ratchet Happy Birthday, which in context is just pandering. And in the former case, might be the sort of song that might bite Drake in the ass when Sophie eventually sings it back in his face. And you know what's really frustrating about this whole damn thing? That I felt about 6 listens into this hour-and-a-half long album. You know what? It could have possibly worked, but it would have involved taking artistic risks that I doubt Drake even cares enough at this point to attempt. Assuming that he's too scared to go to J. Prince to go against him and truly end Kanye or Pusha T's careers, which I don't even doubt he could do, but let's assume he could. What he should have done here is double down on the accessible, pop-leaning side for his female audience. Forget the undercooked, sloppily written, mostly forgettable brag rap, although that Young Thug impression he was working on Mob Ties, that was a decent high point. And Can't Take a Joke and Sandra's Rose, they were kind of solid enough too. Hell, Sandra's Rose got the primo beat, I respected that. And then, you know what, if Drake worked on refining the R&B tunes, some actual groove, that could cross over instead of these dreary, bassy drones. And if you're gonna throw down some bars, take lessons from the more mature wave of emo rappers who can get vulnerable to accentuate their maturity and the reality of their situations. You would have got some respect from those OGs regardless. It wouldn't be a response to Pusha T, you'd still get some shit from the less mature side, but it would sure as hell be better than the unconvincing half measures and cheap shots you try to take here. And while I could go on about how more than a few of the R&B joints Drake just chops up his voice to fill up space, even Nice for What does not escape that, or how the fidelity and placement of the samples and synths and even Drake's voice is all over the damn place all across both discs, or how the record has no momentum whatsoever. But I think by this point, you get my point. Because at the end of the day, for me covering Drake albums, it's become work. A slog of overlong albums that, because of stream trolling, have to be covered all over again on Billboard Breakdown coming up next week. And when the record is this bad, as this clearly is, there's no excuse. It's a light 4 out of 10. Even then, I'm being generous. Only saved from worse by the 4 or 5 passable songs that saved this 25-song gelatinous ooze from being unbearable. For fans, look, take the good cuts and leave this behind. There are better better ways to waste an hour and a half than listening to Drake masturbate all over his delusions of grandeur. And considering how many listens I wound up giving this, I think I'm about done cleaning up this mess. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I went on entirely too long about this goddamn album, but hey, it needed to be said, and I'm not going to mince any words about it. You want to buy the record for some bizarre reason, links down there below. The poll's up there for the Drake stands Tell Me How Wrong I Am, although I'm really not. In comparison with the rest of this discography, this is a lower tier release. He's sure as hell not trying to innovate in the same way that he did on previous records. You can't really deny that if you're being honest with yourself. But hey, if you liked it, go ahead, tell me how wrong I am. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, so I could have covered this earlier, link to my Patreon, right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, or even songs, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details about my schedule, linked on my Instagram, down there below, and also just to keep a reminder that coming up on my 5th year anniversary, and as per my usual anniversaries, if you guys want to see me cover a record from last year, go to the community tab on my YouTube channel and place your suggestion and your vote down over there. Keep in mind that upvoting all those posts doesn't mean it's going to be covered any more likely, and just a friendly reminder that you can only vote once, and if you put multiple records in your post, I'm going to choose the one I want. So yeah, keep that in mind. Happy to see you over there. That'll be coming up probably next week. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time. High school pics, you was even bad then. You ain't stressing off no lover.